1. It can often feel frustrating and pointless to argue with a conspiracist. Highlighting logical contradictions or a lack of reliable evidence, even showing them evidence that counters their claim, can seem like a waste of time when you don't make progress in changing a person's mind. But that does not mean you shouldn't try. What you should not do is accuse another person of ignorance or stupidity, however tempting that might be in the heat of an argument. Instead, examine where they have obtained their evidence, ask them what the chances are that the conspiracy could have been kept a secret by so many people. The moon landing hoax is a good example of a conspiracy theory that is difficult to justify on these grounds, as it requires tens of thousands of people working for NASA, and the many other industries that supported the Apollo missions to have been in on it, and to have remained silent for half a century. Just as importantly, try to understand their underlying concerns and why it is that they believe, or want to believe, what they do. 2. Many sports involve interpreting and anticipating the behavior of other athletes. In basketball, for example, an athlete not only must execute actions in light of her immediate goals and overall game strategy, she also must coordinate her actions with her teammates' complementary actions and opponents' disruptive, incompatible actions. Coordinating her actions with teammates and opponents requires interpreting their behavior and anticipating what they will do next. For instance, she must recognize when an opponent is driving to the basket, anticipate the positions her teammates will be in when the opponent is driving to the basket, and decide whether to pursue the driving opponent or let a better positioned teammate step in to defend against the drive. This dynamic interaction happens very quickly, and superior athletes are more highly skilled at coordinating their behavior with teammates and opponents' behavior. 3. We all have an intuitive sense of what politics means, but may find it harder to define the term precisely. Modern political science offers a clear and helpful concept: politics is collective choice that is binding on a community. To see this, draw a contrast between politics as the domain of collective choice and economics as the domain of individual choice. Economic choices, for example, what to consume or produce, or what kind of employment to engage in, are individual and voluntary. Such choices will be constrained. We may not be able to buy everything we want or choose the exact job we want, but they are not coerced. We make these choices, and no one else forces us to do so. Furthermore, these choices affect only the person who makes them and other, similarly consenting individuals who freely enter into voluntary, contractual relationships. By contrast, political choices are collective and binding. They may be a consequence of individual decisions. In a dictatorship, the choice of a single leader; in a democracy, the choices of a majority of citizens, but everyone in the community is obliged to accept these decisions, whether or not they support them. 4. It is not perhaps surprising that prior experience affects the interpretation of and response to symptoms. Having a history of particular symptoms or experience of illness in others, i.e. vicarious experience, generates assumptions about the meaning and implications of some symptoms. Also, symptoms considered to be rare in either one's own experience or in that of others are more likely to be interpreted as serious than a previously experienced or widespread symptom. Believing symptoms to be just a bug that's going round can mean that people sometimes ignore potentially dangerous warning signals. A knowledge of which bodily signs are associated with particular behavior or illnesses, e.g. sweats and exercise, sweats and flu, will enable interpretation of the symptom and attachment of a meaning to it. These reserves of knowledge are known as disease prototypes. Relevant to the ongoing, at the time of writing, coronavirus outbreak is the earlier finding that people tend to perceive novel viral threats as higher in risk compared to more common threats such as influenza. 5-6. Following the dramatic arc of sporting contests and athletic careers allows us to witness the efforts of athletes to live good human lives, to pursue excellence, victory, fame, and fortune, and also to deal with failure and loss. And while the drama of a play or novel is the scripted drama of the author's creation, the drama of sport is that of real people who must live with the consequences of their decisions. This is one reason why I reject the idea that sports should be sharply separated from real life. When we watch sports, we are not watching characters. The actor who plays Romeo doesn't die at the end of the performance, he gets to leave the character's plight behind when he goes home. By contrast, injuries that players suffer in the pursuit of their goals are not rehearsed, and the quarterback of the losing team does not get to divest himself of the game's result. If these features of sports do not necessarily make sports an encouragement to ethical reflection that is superior to drama or literature, I think they at least show that sports are not inferior in this regard. At a minimum, I want to insist that if it makes sense to regard the plays of Shakespeare as legitimate sources for our own thinking about the nature of the good life, then there is no reason to think that sports are less capable of igniting such reflective capacities. 7. Participants who volunteer for a study must be allowed to discontinue participation. If research participants feel stressed, tired, or otherwise unable to continue the study to completion, there should be no stated threat of penalty for withdrawing. The informed consent should make it clear what the results of terminating will be, even if the probability of withdrawal is low. One approach to this problem is to provide participants with prorated compensation, based on the percentage of the study they completed. If participants are being paid $25 for participating in a focus group, and the focus group begins to explore issues that make the participant uneasy, a withdrawing participant should be paid for the part of the focus group that she or he completed. For college students who participate for course credit, such partial credit could be harder to construct, but you should have a plan, especially if you think participants might not finish the study. As with many parts of the research process, it is wise to prepare for low-probability events. 8. Reproduction is a fundamental problem for all organisms. Animal species exhibit a diverse range of strategies to produce offspring, which often require large inputs of energy and are associated with major risks to their survival. Among mammals, females undergo more direct costs of reproduction, insofar as they carry, literally, the burden of embryonic and fetal growth and nourishment of the young through lactation. Thus, the health of a female mammal directly affects reproductive outcome, both in terms of her fertility and the survival or death of her offspring. Human females experience these costs as a function of their mammalian heritage, but the variety of environments they inhabit generates substantial differences in the reproductive risks that women face. Their abilities to reduce these risks are important determinants of individual and population differences in maternal and child health and survival. 9. Galileo studied terrestrial gravitation, not by asking about the nature of gravity, but by observing how objects behave when gravity acts on them. In particular, he did a series of experiments on balls rolling down inclined planes, the purpose of the incline being, in his words, to dilute gravity enough so that he could measure the time it took for the ball to roll with the primitive clocks available to him. By meticulously measuring the time it took the ball to travel various distances, he was able to find out how the speed of the ball changed in transit. His bottom line: terrestrial gravity causes all objects to accelerate the same amount, regardless of their mass, and the rate of that acceleration is constant. These simple observations allowed Galileo and his contemporaries to understand and predict things like the fall of a stone or the arc of a cannonball. They are the basic facts that tell you everything you need to know about how unsupported objects behave at the surface of our planet. 10. The rule about not being a hero isn't about not taking action. This rule is about being a bigger person and having the good sense to walk away from a potential confrontation, even if there is a part of you that doesn't want to. Trust me. I know how hard this can be. I was running early one morning in Baltimore, Maryland, toward the Inner Harbor. I noticed two guys on the sidewalk ahead of me. I was in my jogging clothes, and they were fully dressed walking around at 6 a.m., which is a bit unusual. As I ran toward them, I saw them look at each other and then spread apart, creating a situation in which I'd have to run between the two of them. If I had placed myself between them, who knows what they might have done. I decided to play it safe, run across the street, making sure to give them eye contact and let them know I'm paying attention. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe they had 6 friends around the corner, and they were going to rob me. My main point is that I didn't let my ego get in the way. I didn't feel a need to prove myself by running between them and risk a potentially dangerous situation. 11-12. Ownership of the media gives control over the nature of the information distributed. Proponents of public ownership of the media argue that because information is a public good, that is, once it has been supplied to some consumers, it is hard to keep it away from others who have not paid for it. Private owners tend to provide less information than would be socially desirable. They also argue that with private ownership, the media industry runs the risk of representing the views of only a narrow group in society, and state ownership of the media is necessary to expose the public to desirable cultural or educational themes or values. Opponents of public ownership argue that government control of the media can be used to manipulate people and distort the information supplied in the incumbent government's favor. Moreover, experience shows that government-owned enterprises are less likely to be responsive to consumer demand. Finally, government-owned media are not subject to competition, thus giving rise to the danger of both poor quality production and inefficiencies. A recent article on the British Broadcasting Corporation, BBC, claims that government ownership makes it harder than it would otherwise be for other media companies to grow. The article claims that the large amounts of tax revenue that are given to the BBC give it an advantage relative to private companies. It also contends that as a private company, the BBC would be more dynamic and therefore better able to compete with global media firms.